In this segment, we're going to talk about one of the least strenuous but most effective forms of gardening, no-till gardening. Now, what is no-till gardening? Now, in more traditional forms of gardening, it's very common when preparing a plot to garden in to actually till and uproot the top layer of the soil. Talk about strenuous. Now, they do that so they have a clean slate to work in and to uproot the weeds that they don't want growing in the bed. You know, that isn't absolutely necessary. There is a much more less strenuous and effective way to do that, and that is no-till gardening. So with no-till gardening, what we're going to actually do is, you can see a lot of weeds growing here, right? You can see a lot of the native plants already taking over this bed, and it'll make it very challenging for other plants to grow because they're going to compete with the native plants. So with no-till gardening, what we're going to do is open up the soil and then put a layer of biodegradable material like paper or cardboard to act as a weed barrier and kill off the native plants. And then on top of that, we're going to add our gardening medium, whether it's going to be garden soil, compost, worm castings, whatever you want it to be, and we're just going to garden straight into that. Seriously, everyone, I am obsessed with no-till gardening. It is a lot less backbreaking and a lot more effective. It is so important that when we garden, we are prioritizing the health of our soil. And with no-till gardening, we are doing just that. Because we're not disrupting and uprooting everything, the ecology of the soil is going to stay intact. And with the processes that we're going to follow in no-till gardening, we're actually going to nourish and replenish the soil and really set ourselves up for an amazing growing season. All right, enough talking. Let me show you guys how I do it. So I would say the very first step of no-till gardening is really figuring out where you are going to garden. Once you have your location set out, we can get to work. Now, I have this really large bed that I'm actually extending a bit outwards, and I do have a few native plants growing in here. So I'm going to be applying the no-till method to get this bed ready for planting. The first thing I'm going to do is get my handy dandy pitchfork, and we're actually going to poke holes in the soil and aerate it. We're going to bring oxygen into the soil to reinvigorate the microorganisms so that they can get to work. And doing so is quite simple. All you have to do is find your spot, hop on, and loosen the soil. We're going to pull up just a little bit so we see a few cracks. See how the soil is opening up? We're seeing some cracks. Just do it for a little bit and then pull right out. And that's essentially all we need to do to open up the soil. Now, as you can see, it's a lot less strenuous than completely tilling the soil, and it's a lot less traumatic to the ecology of the soil. Now, you would just have to poke holes and aerate the complete area that you are going to be gardening in. Perfect. Once this bed is ready, we'll come back for the next step. All right, so for the purposes of this video, I'm only going to be working in this portion of the bed because it'll take me all day to get the entire bed ready. But as you can see, this soil looks fluffed and ready to go. It does look a little crumbly and worked through, but not nearly as bad as it would have looked if it were tilled and completely uprooted. But again, it is fluffed and ready to go, so we can move on to our next step. Now, this step isn't absolutely necessary. I just find it helps the breaking down process of the no-till method work a little faster. I'm going to go ahead and actually just give this soil a little bit of a watering so that it's nice and moist. Nice moist soil, we love to see it. And not too much. I don't want it to be soaked, just moist. So now that we've aerated our soil and got it a little moist, we can move on to our next step. Now we're going to be adding a biodegradable weed barrier to help kill off the weeds and protect the ecology of the soil underneath. I'm going to be using cardboard. You can use newspaper as well. I know people always ask, like, is the ink safe? Usually most things that are printed on cardboard or newspaper are soy-based, so that'll biodegrade back into the soil without causing any harm, so you shouldn't worry about that. Now, adding the weed barrier does a few things, and I find them all so fascinating. First and foremost, we're creating a weed barrier. So what's going to happen is it's going to kill off all of the weeds and all of the plants that are already here. And because we moistened it, it actually helps speed up that breaking down process a little more. But what's even more fascinating is because we are breaking down these greens, these plants, it's going to actually feed life back into the soil as they break down, which is great for the health of the soil. So you essentially kill two birds with one stone there. You're killing off weeds and you're feeding sustenance back into the soil. What's also fascinating about using a carbon-based weed barrier like cardboard or newspaper, things that are paper-based, is worms are actually very attracted to carbon-based materials. So it's actually going to pull a lot of worms into the area and just create a network of life underneath the soil. Last year when we did this, after about a month or two, I would lift up the cardboard and I would see an entire network of worms under there, tunneling and breaking things down. It was really fascinating. And if you don't know, worms are extremely beneficial in the soil. So the more you have of them, the better. Now, if you're concerned about how long it'll take for the cardboard or newspaper to break down, just to put it into perspective, we actually worked the entire rest of the bed with this same method. And it has completely broken down since then. You'll see over the next few steps, we are gonna ensure that this breaks down quickly when we actually wet the cardboard and moisten the soil on top as well. So with that said, let's get into it. Placing the cardboard is super simple. We do run a nursery business and we go through a lot of boxes, so it's a really great way to recycle and repurpose your cardboard. Perfect, so our cardboard is laid over the area that we are going to be blocking off. Now, as you can see, I put bricks down to hold it, to weigh it down so it doesn't blow away in the wind. The next step is gonna be to get it really, really wet. We're gonna soak this cardboard and you'll see why soon. This might take a while, but that's all right. You definitely wanna make sure it's really damp. It'll help weigh it down and it'll help the breaking down process of the cardboard really move along. So now we could add our soil. There are actually two things I'm going to be adding on top of the cardboard. I'm going to be starting with some compost and then finishing it off with a layer of worm castings. This will ensure that everything that I plant has all the goodness it needs to grow. Compost! More compost. Now we're just going to spread it out so that it evenly coats the cardboard. Ugh. One layer down, one layer to go. Now we're going to add the worm castings. Oh my gosh. It is so black and so rich. Usually, the darker the soil, the richer it is. Oh, that is beautiful. Now I'm just gonna mix it in with the compost a little bit. Oh my gosh, it looks beautiful. We're done. Something else I do want to note, I really feel like the true final step would be to apply a layer of mulch. This will help retain moisture and protect the soil from the harsh UV rays from the sun. But I'm actually not going to do that until I actually have things planted, because a layer of mulch would make it a little difficult to get in there and work. But we will cover that when it comes time to plant. Now, when it does come time to plant, I think it's really cool that we use cardboard, or if you use newspaper, because literally with your spade, you can carve out a hole in the cardboard and dig directly into that hole, and you'll still have the weed barrier, the rest of the cardboard or newspaper around it. It is really easy to work with, and again, over time, all of it's just gonna biodegrade after it's done doing its job, breaking down those weeds and bringing nutrients back into the soil. And that is how I practice the no-till planting method. What's so fascinating about the no-till planting method though is that, as you can see, I practice that right into a plot in the soil there, right? You can actually use the no-till method in other forms of planting. Like here, we have a raised bed, and we actually practice the no-till method in here as well. We dug out a little trench on the side so that we could actually fit the wood of the bed inside. And once we dug it in, the center of the bed was still very green and full of weeds and exposed. I went in, I aerated the soil, I placed a layer of cardboard on top of that, and then our gardening medium on top of that as well. And year after year, we've just had very productive yields. The cardboard did exactly what we wanted it to do. It killed off the weeds, prevented others from growing in, and it fed those nutrients back into the soil, and it protected the ecology of the soil, which was the most important thing. So I'm really not surprised that our yields have been so great. So really, no matter what kind of gardening you want to do, whether it's directly into the ground, creating a plot right into the soil, or creating some raised beds, you can practice the no-till gardening method. Well, y'all, I really hope this helped. Let's move on to the next segment.